It's 5 o'clock. I'm sitting at the dinner table and I'm watching my wife scream at our children to get off their video games and come to dinner. And she turns and she looks at me. And I can see the irritation and the frustration, but worst of all, the disappointment on her face because we both know this is my fault. And she says to me, "You go get them." So I get up from the table and I walk back to their bedroom. And as I am peeling my crying children off of their gaming devices, I'm at a total loss. We can't ban video games in our home. I make them for a living. What if there was a way that we could end video game time without a fight? What if there was a way we could just quit arguing about how much they play? What if there was a way that this thing that's supposed to bring joy and connection into people's lives wasn't a waste of time, but could be meaningful and useful for people? What if there was a way we could just manage our kids' gaming like it was any other activity in their lives? And I looked everywhere, but all you could find on the internet were scary stories of how video games were bad or the counter stories of like, there's nothing to worry about. None of that was useful. And so using my knowledge from what I know inside the industry of like how games are made and the effects they create, and working with my wife, we came up with practical solutions we could put into place to help stop fighting with our kids over video games. My name is Scott Novus, and I believe you too can stop fighting with your children over video games. And over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to share with you 3 simple techniques you can use to, number 1, stop fighting with your kids about ending game time. Number 2, stop fighting over how much they play. Number 3, stop fighting over whether or not video games are a waste of time. So let's get after it. Number 1, the number 1 thing people ask me, Scott, how can I stop fighting with my kids over ending game time? Well, to answer that question, I also want to touch on a core parenting fear because it goes almost hand in hand with this, and they're related. It just isn't exactly obvious. And that core parenting fear is that video games make kids violent. Now, the good news is there's a bunch of great research that shows that is not true, that video games do not, in fact, increase player aggression or violence. But it doesn't feel comforting, does it? Because we see how upset our kids get when we want them to end video game time. So what's really going on for them? Well, to understand that, let me ask you a question. Do you know how your child's video game ends? You probably know how a baseball game ends, or a football game, or a basketball game. Like lots of the sports, we know how they all end. Lots of board games, we know when they're over. What about video games? Would it surprise you to learn that some video games never end? Probably not. But did you know some of them you can't save whenever you want? Some of them you can't even pause. So we talk about ending game time. We really need to start wrapping our head around what are we trying to do and how do we stop it? Now, if your child plays a game that is one of those checkpoint games, I don't know why developers think this is a fun thing to do, but they basically say you can't save your game till you achieve enough progress. Let me put this in context for you that maybe it can make it more relatable. You're sitting there at work, you got a brand new tool. They just rolled out. It's awesome. It's exactly what you need to do your job and you love it. It just has one feature. You can't save your work until you're finished. So you're cranking away. Maybe it's a great word processor or design tool or the latest thing from Adobe, but it's the bee's knees. You love using this. It makes your job so much fun and satisfying and impactful. And then it's 5 o'clock and your boss walks in and says, day's over, shut it off, turn it down. How would you feel? You're just about to lose all of your work. That's the framework many gamers find themselves in when the parents walk in and say, shut it off now, turn it on. Well, often parents use language that's imprecise because honestly, most of us don't actually care if the console's off or not. We want the child to stop playing and we want their attention to turn to us so we can go do something else. I mean, honestly, how often do we turn off our cell phones? Like, never. So it's not so much that we've got to turn it off, but to the player, if they're in one of those games, turning it off is devastating. They're going to lose all the work they put into that game. In a similar way, if you're involved in one of these multiplayer games, one of these online internet games where you play with other people, well, now the stressors go to a whole new level. I don't know a single parent that would walk out to the middle of a field in the middle of a Little League game when their kid's on the mound about to deliver a pitch, right? There's all the families behind the backstop. Everybody's watching, bases loaded. Maybe it's the bottom of the sixth. It's a close game, and grab their kid by the collar and drag him off the mound going, it's dinner time. You're going now. But if you've done that to your child in a video game, you could be completely forgiven because the social cues are invisible. You can't see the other team your child is competing with. You probably didn't even know there was an audience watching the match. That's what Twitch is all about. More and more video games are being streamed to live audiences. That's right. People watching video games. And it's massive. You probably didn't even know your kid was playing with anyone else because they're probably wearing a headset and they got a microphone. You can't hear them. But the emotional context is nearly identical for your gamer. It's humiliating. Is it any wonder they get extremely upset? Yes, the games are compelling, but those threats create extreme emotional duress. They would for anybody. So what can you do about it? Well, I have good news for you. You happen to live with an expert who is only too happy to share with you in excruciatingly tedious detail how their games end. And that's the beginning of it. So part of this ending the fight is we got to learn, how does their game end? And the reason nobody really knows is all the games are different. They're all totally different. You got to know how your kid's game ends. And in my experience, they're just all too happy to share that with you. Once you know that information, you can now employ that into part 2 of this strategy. Negotiate the end before they begin. In my experience, gamers game. What I mean by that is, if you go to them and say, hey, 5 o'clock, we're in the car on the way to grandma's. Are you sure you want to get on Fortnite with your friends? It's a hard stop. I've had my kids basically go, I'll grab the Nintendo Switch, or I'll play Pokemon or something on the phone. They'll choose a different game that can be stopped or paused without a lot of duress. And then maybe in a different circumstance, perhaps after homework is done, or there's a little more open-ended and they've got some time before, bedtime. It's like, sure, play with your friends instead of watching TV. It's okay. Now, let me give you a pro tip. My company, Game Truck, does 30,000 video game birthday parties a year. We use this thousands of times every weekend to end video game parties without a fight. If you want a gamer's attention, don't scream at them. Don't touch them. Flick the lights in the room they're in. It'll get their peripheral vision. It'll break their concentration. They're going to look up. When you make eye contact, that's when you tell them you have 5 minutes, 10 minutes to wrap up what you're doing, and then we're moving on to the next thing. And it works with adults too, just to let you know. So if we're going to end game time without a fight, by avoiding the fight altogether, by being on the same ground and understanding how video games end and what we can do to basically cut it off at the pass, right? We all know how this is going to end. We've all agreed to it. That's a great start. But what about the second fight? What about how much they want to play? Now, you will hear from lots of people, you've got to control, how much screen time your kids have. You're not going to hear that from me. What I want to know is, are they getting enough of the right kind of social play? And when I ask that question, I ask it very specifically because we talk about how much our kids play, we have to talk about the other associated fear. The video games are addictive, and our kids might get addicted to video games. Totally understandable. But what's really going on here? Well, to understand this dynamic, we have to understand actually what the latest science is teaching us about addiction and emotional pain, honestly. It turns out I learned this from the work of Dr. Mark Goulston. There are 3 coping mechanisms that we all have. We just manifest them differently when we experience deep emotional pain. One of them is numbing, one of them is depression, and one of them is aggression. And it's that deep emotional pain. And he literally says it's at the point of despair. And if you look at the word, it's despair, when we're unpaired, when we're decoupled. We can turn to other activities or things to try to soothe or manage the emotional pain. And the numbing does become addiction. The depression, oh my goodness, that's horrible. The risk of suicide, and even worse, that aggression can turn out as acting against others, violence against others. We see that in the media way too much. What's the antidote? Literally repairing, is giving, bonding back. It is the connections and the bonds we form with others that give us relatedness, emotional regulation, and resiliency. So we look at playtime. To me, it's, are we getting enough of the right kind of social bonding? I'll tell you a story. I first met Anthony at a video game tournament. We were hosting a tournament at the Boys and Girls Club in Chandler, Arizona, and it was probably the biggest Mario Kart tournament maybe ever. It was like 250 contestants. It was crazy. And the moment I saw Anthony, I knew, man, he did not want to be there. He brought his son, but Anthony was like cowboy fan, from the tips of his cowboy boots to his 10-gallon hat. He was all about the NFL. And you could just kind of tell. He's like, what is this? Why am I here? But to his credit, he brought his son to this video game tournament. And as the tournament started up, I didn't see Anthony anywhere. He was probably on his phone, out in the gym, whatever. But as it progressed, his son started to win. And that's when we saw Anthony move in. Pretty soon, he was at the table around where his son was competing. And then he was standing behind his son. When his son reached the quarterfinals, Anthony was on his phone with his wife, explaining to her what was going on. And when he reached semifinals, Anthony FaceTimed her so she could watch as well. Now, you've probably never been to one of these video game tournaments, but especially the Nintendo ones, or like Smash Brothers or Mario Kart. It is traditional at the end of a match, win or lose, the first thing the contestants do is shake hands or bump elbows, but there's a sign of respect. There's a sign of appreciation for a match well played. And the championships are the best of all. It is just like great competition, and there's real energy around. Thanks for the great match. And normally, the first thing that happens is the 2 contestants pop up and, congratulate each other. That didn't exactly happen. They did shake hands. But what happened first is when his son won, Anthony grabbed him out of the chair in a bear hug and lifted him out of his seat. Because for the first time, he saw his son for who he really was, a great competitor. That tournament lasted 8 hours. It was all day Saturday. Was that too much game time? When we dig into video game time, what we really want to look at is, what is the context in which our kids are playing? An analogy would be, if you took your kid to the YMCA to play basketball all day on a Saturday with his classmates and other families from your neighborhood in a well-lit gym, you'd be like, this is great, it's wonderful. Or you could send them to downtown Phoenix on Saturday night alone with a basketball. 5 minutes would be too long. So what's the context of who they're playing with and what they're playing and how is it working? And so one of my tips here that I give every parent: play video games with your kids. Sit down and play alongside them. And if you're afraid to play with them, even better. That is awesome. They desperately need you to play with them, because what kids are lacking today, what they never get to see, is what it looks like for a mature adult they respect and admire to struggle They're not seeing it in social media. They don't see it at school. Take your kid to work day. That's like a carnival with balloons and, like, oh, it's all happy cake donut thing. They don't see customers yell at us. They don't see friction from other departments. They don't see what it really looks like to struggle. And it leaves them with the impression they're the only one who's struggling. And so role modeling for your children what it's like to learn something and show them how you want them to respond by the way you respond can have an enormous impact on their emotional well-being and their development and their connection. Now, let me give you a pro tip about playing video games with your kids. Do not compete with them. Do not pick a competitive game. Pick a cooperative or collaborative game. There are tons of these out there. There are more and more games that are called couch co-op games. You probably didn't even know that. They're video games you can play side by side. Minecraft is a great example. It's a video game that it doesn't even actually have a competitive mode. There's a creative mode and there's a survival mode, and you work together. The Nintendo Switch has tons of these games, which you can find them on a PC as well. Pick a game where you're working together to achieve a common goal, and you're going to have a radically different experience with your kids. So as we look into that social and emotional connection, we look at who they're playing with, how much they're playing. I can tell you this, every minute I ever played with my kids doesn't count towards screen time. That's like, I never get enough of that. They don't get enough of that. So when we're looking at how much they're playing, where they're playing, we're always looking at the context, who with, how much, and what kind of social dynamic is available. And we always prioritize inside out, from family to close friends. They're playing with strangers, shut that down, right? Don't need a lot of that. Playing with people you can actually hang out with, high priority, reinforce that all day long. But what about that third fear? So we've talked about ending games. We've talked about how much they play. But what about video games being a waste of time? Now, if you're not a gamer, you think of yourself as I'm not a gamer. You own a cell phone, and the only games you play are on your cell phone. You can be completely forgiven for believing video games are a waste of time because that's your lived experience. The games that you have the most exposure to are literally engineered to waste your time. That's what casual games are. They're little 2 to 3 minute hits. They're just designed to burn up time in line when you're waiting for something or you got a few minutes to kill. Yeah, they're frivolous, compelling, but frivolous. But your child, if they're playing on a computer or console, are having a radically different experience. Those games, core games, are engineered to induce very different feelings in the player. Specifically, what's happening for your kids are they're facing hard problems, they're developing skills to overcome those hard problems, and they are persisting until they win. So one of the things I have to share with you, please stop telling your children, never tell your children that video games are a waste of time because you're working against your own goals. They don't hear that video game is a waste of time. They hear facing hard problems, developing skills, and persisting is a waste of time because that's what a video game is to them. That's what it means. And so if they shouldn't be doing that on something they enjoy, why would they ever do it anywhere else on anything else? A way more effective way to handle this is to talk to your kid like they're a project manager, like the video game is their job. Tell you a story. Kelly emailed me and she said, Scott, how do I stop fighting with my kid over video games? And so we started talking about it. He said, is it how do we stop fighting over end time, playing too much? And she got into the waste of time issue. I'm like, well, have you played with him? And she said, no. So she sat down and her son plays Minecraft. And she was blown away. She had no idea the worlds he was creating. It is one of the most popular games of all time. And I think of it as a collaborative manifestation engine. Really big words to tell you this is a game where almost anything you can imagine, you can create in real time together and play with together. If you can dream it, you can make it, you can play with it. It is the original sandbox game. It is amazing. What she saw were the worlds, literally worlds he was building, the cities, the complexity. He was learning engineering because there's an electrical engineering system in the game. And then it dawned on her that a lot of the work he was doing was very similar to the type of work that her graphic designers do at her very successful marketing company, being creative within constraints and resources and time. And she called me and she said, I found my son. She was in tears. So, that third pro tip, ask them what is difficult for you about this game. Ask them what challenge they're facing in the game. You're going to have radically different conversations with your children about their video games when you start engaging them on that level. And let me give you a little bit of encouraging news. You probably did not know this. There are more than 200 colleges now that offer tuition assistance or scholarships for esports. That is competitive video gaming. Yes, there are kids going to college today, and your kid might be one of them in the future, who are getting paid to compete at video games. And if your gamer happens to be a daughter, congratulations. Encouraging her gaming, you have triple the chances that she may pursue a STEM degree. That's a degree in science, technology, engineering, or math. It turns out that people who like to play with technology often want to learn how to create it if they're encouraged to do so. But the important thing is, if we've learned how the games end and you've stepped in to play alongside them and you understand that social emotional need, if you really want games to not be a waste of time, you can help your children take those skills they're developing in the game, facing hard problems, developing skill, and persisting. And you can build a bridge from that to their future, because they don't have enough lived experience to see how valuable that is, but you do. And once you have that relationship with them, you now have a capacity to have even more influence about how you can direct their future and engage their interests in what they love to do. So we've gone over those three simple systems. We can stop fighting over how games end. We can stop fighting about how much they play. And we can stop fighting about whether or not games are a waste of time. And the number one question I get asked is, Scott, can you help me stop fighting with my kid over video games? The answer is yes. All you have to do is email me at hello@scottnovus.com, and I will send you my PDF guide on how to stop fighting with your kids over video games. And there's a bonus in there. I'm going to list a bunch of video games you can play with your kids. Ones I've played myself, I've vetted them out. They're on a variety of systems. They're a ton of fun, but it's going to include all the steps and some more context about what's happening in the world of video games with your kids. Because the more you know, the more you're able to effectively manage and parent your children. Now, raising kids is tough. And sometimes it feels like video games don't make that any easier. And I hope the information I've given you today is going to make it easier for you to achieve your goals as a parent, because I believe we all want healthy, well-adjusted kids that have a bright future. But I want to leave you with this one thought, because as parents, it's so rare for us to get encouragement. So I want you to know you are a good parent. You're here getting this information. You are a good parent because you care about your children's well-being. You are a good parent because you're still the biggest influence in your child's life. You are a good parent. Thank you.